everyone, welcome back to Pete Punch Beef Gaming. Today we're going to do a both product review and a little bit of an unboxing of the new Warhammer Age of Sigmar Idoneth Deepkin army book that just came out this weekend. Really, my intent of this video, I guess I would say, is there's a couple things I want to go over. One, I want to do kind of a show off of the army book. I want everybody to be able to take a look at what we've got here, what's in there, what you're getting for your roughly $50 US. And then I also want to go through my thoughts on the book. So 3 items specifically: playstyle, number 1. Number 2, is it competitive? Is this an army that's gonna win? And then finally, the start collecting box. You know, the models that are out there, if you bought the start collecting box, is it gonna be a good use of your money? Or do you need to go kind of a different route? So I wanna dive into all 3 of those topics under the my kind of thoughts category. And I also wanna show you what's in this book so you get a good look at it. Sneak preview, I'd say GW, as per usual, did a very nice job with this book. And so with that, let's dive into it. Okay, so here we go. Let's dive into the Idoneth Deepkin Army book. So the first thing you'll notice is this is, as per usual, got a little bit of the spot gloss that GW treats all of their army book covers with. Beautifully done. Certainly no exception to their standards. The interior cover, it's got a nice little dust cover picture of the Idoneth Deepkin. And we're not going to spend a ton of time going over all of every word here that we've got, but effectively, and I'll move this over just a little bit so you can see it, we've got 96 pages of information here to go through. The first 55 pages are covering all of the history in the background, along with some of the art that we've got here. You can see that lots of full color art. I think a lot of it came out of the original book as well. Talks about the genesis of the race and kind of their rise to power, along with kind of all of the places they lived. You get a nice map here. You get to know a little bit about you know, their history here from the Age of the Myth all the way to the Age of Chaos, and then Age of Sigmar, which is where we're at currently, followed by kind of the Idoneth at War, how they build their armies, what that looks like in this area, and just kind of a little bit of different information about the Enclaves. Those are kind of maybe the sub-factions is how you could think of that. So you've got the Futhan, the Morphan, so on and so forth here. And then they talk about the kings, the Asharan agents, which we'll talk a little bit about here as we get into more of the allegiance abilities, are kind of the spellcasters. They have the gift of the arcane mastery. They talk about their cavalry, and then the non-Amarti infantry. And then, of course, you get into the art. Gorgeous, gorgeous miniatures. And, of course, the studio has painted up some brilliant looking models to go along with this army. As you would expect, nothing less. You can see this is their behemoth right here, their Leviathan. And then, of course, we've got the Achelan Alopex right here, which is kind of a 2-person shark, one of the range units. They don't have many, but that's one of them. And then you've got their Eidolon, the aspect of the storm. So lots of really good pictures here to draw inspiration from. As we move closer to page 55, or past 55 and get into page 56, we've got the painting guide. And this is great for new players. If they're curious, hey, how in the heck do they paint this? Or you're new to miniatures painting. Aside from the fact that there are a ton of YouTube videos that are out there, got kind of a step-by-step process of how you might paint their skin tones or their crests, or how they do some of their beasts. And then, of course, they also have tutorials on how to paint up the different sub-factions here, which you'll find are a total of 6. They go from everything from how we're going to undercoat them. So most of these are white, with the exception of the Morphan, which are undercoated in black. Now, this is really where the meat of this, I guess, product video that we're doing here. And it starts at page 62. So really the next 30-ish pages, a little over 30, are going to go into the forces of the Idoneth. And we aren't going to focus as much on the Path to Glory. We're going to focus more on the allegiance abilities, battle traits, the enhancements, war scrolls, the enclaves. We'll take a little bit of a look at the grand strategies and the battle tactics for match play, because I think that's where most folks are at. But there are 2 things that I want to point out here. The first is, if you haven't done a Path to Glory, check out my other video series. But they are so much fun, especially if you're starting a new army. And I encourage you to go back and take a look at that. And then also go back and read through the GW stories, the fluff, as it were. There is so much good information. They put a ton of work into developing their history and their storyline that I can't recommend it enough to go through and take a look at it. All right. So with that, let's dive in a little bit more specifically into the... the enhancements and the command traits and all of that good stuff that we know and love. All right, the first one is, and we're going to go back just a page here. Okay, so the first one is here are the Enclaves. So when you build an Idoneth army, the first thing you can do is put together a, you get to choose an enclave. And each of the enclaves is a sub-faction and it has different abilities that we will be able to take a look at as we get a little bit farther down into it. So just note that there's 6. They correspond with the painting guides that we had earlier. So maybe you are more of a fluff player and you want to pick something based on a paint scheme. Maybe you are kind of a rules-heavy person and that's where you really want to focus. Either way, you've got options to include the middle ground. The next ability that we're going to cover here is the Forgotten Nightmares. This is a really slick ability, and essentially what this says is that Idoneth Deepkin units, that's the key word, can only be picked as targets of a shooting attack if they're the closest eligible target to the attacking model. So you can control what shooting heavy armies attack by putting maybe throwaway units in front of your more valuable units, because they have to focus on those first. Now, the next thing that is really important to note here is the Tides of Death. And this is kind of a carryover from the last book, but really there are just, there are 4 things that happen at the start of any battle round. And the first is battle round 1, which they call Load Tide, means that all of your Deepkin are considered treated as being in cover, which is great. That is a huge benefit. So not only do you have to shoot at the closest unit, but they also get cover, even if they're not around a terrain feature. Battle round 2, they have something called Flood Tide. Flood Tide, all of the Idoneth Deepkin units can run and still shoot or charge in the same turn. So important to know, you can run and shoot or charge, not both. So you gotta make your choice there on which of the 2 that you want to do. Now, the third battle round, and this is subtle, but it is very, very important. All of your Idoneth Deepkin units get strike first effects. That is incredibly powerful, because what you'll notice about this army is it has pretty reasonable damage output, but the fact that it can strike first can really whittle down the numbers and help your army survive the onslaught of whatever your opponent's going to throw back at them. So It's important that if you charge in the first round, you get to choose when to attack, but the third round, all of your stuff gets to fight first, unless of course your opponent also has strike first effects, which are not prolific. You're not going to find a ton of them. The fourth battle round, you can retreat and still charge or shoot in the same turn. So you fall back, you can either shoot or you can charge, which again helps kind of save your units from getting beat up. And you also notice that some of the war scrolls will have benefits, increased damage, rend, things of that nature, in the turns that they charge. So really being able to shoot or charge is an important thing. And then battle round 5, or if it goes even farther than that, you just repeat and you start over again through there. But I suspect by the time you battle round 5, it's pretty much all over. So pretty powerful, pretty good stuff right there. Now, if we move into the rituals, so the Isharan rituals. What this is essentially is if your army includes any Isharan, which I mentioned before, your magic users, you can pick one of the following rituals to influence the Ether Sea during battle. All that is to say that if you've got a spellcaster, you can pick one of these 4 to correspond with one of the 4 tides based on the turn you have. So in other words, if you pick Ritual of the Creeping Mist, friendly Idoneth Deepkin units that are affected by low tide, which is battle round 1, cannot be picked of targets of shooting attacks unless the attacking model is within 12 inches. So again, no sitting way 30 inches back and getting shot up by Stormcast. They have to be within 12 to even shoot at the closest unit. So pretty cool in that regard. Really, really can penalize some of the shooting heavy armies, which are becoming more common in Age of Sigmar. The second one is Ritual of the Surging Stream, and this has to do with the Flood Tide ability, or the Battle Round 2 ability, which allows you to run and still shoot or charge. This gives you a +1 to your run and charge rolls for your Idoneth units. So that is pretty powerful, gets you to where you need to be. And what you'll see here is the Idoneth have incredible speed. The third one is called Ritual of Deep Sight. Friendly Namarti units that are affected by high tide have a ward save of 5+. So the Namarti units are your general foot troops, and you get a 5+ save. What you'll find in the book as we get going a little bit farther is that the heroes all have, generally speaking, a 5+ ward save. Your cavalry and your one behemoth do not. But this will give your units a 5+, which will make them a little bit more resilient. That's actually really, really nice. And then finally, the last one, Ritual of Spiteful Riptide, which corresponds to Battle Round 4, is your Idoneth units affected by the Ebb Tide ability Retreat. Roll a die for each unit within 3 inches of them. On 4+, that unit suffers mortal wounds. So if you've got a unit that's engaged with 2 other units, and it falls back, you roll a d4 for both of them, and on a 3+ or a 4+, they do d3 mortal wounds. So not only are you falling back, positioning yourself to shoot and or charge, but you're also causing mortal wounds, which is really, really nice. So it gives you a reason to want to include a spellcaster in here. All right, moving on, we've got command traits. You'll notice is you've got 3 command traits for the Akellan heroes, the Isharan heroes, and then also the Eidolon generals. The first one, Born from Agony, for the Akellan heroes is at the end of your battle shock phase, you roll a d6, and if you hit a 6, you heal all wounds allocated to that general. Pretty cool. Lord of the Storm and Sea is the second one, and you don't take battle shock tests for Idoneth Deepkin units wholly within 12 inches of this general. That's okay, not too bad. Their morale in general is about average as a whole for these guys, so it can be helpful. And finally, Unstoppable Fury is the third one. While the general is affected by high tide from the Tides of Death table, for each enemy unit within 3 inches of them during the combat phase, add 2 to the attack characteristic of their melee weapons. So what's cool about that one is the high tide is where you get to attack first. So you're adding 2 to your attack characteristics, which is pretty slick, but it only impacts your general. From there, we are going to take a peek at the Sharan heroes. These are spellcasters. So the first one is Hunter of the Souls. At the start of the combat phase, if this general is within 3 inches of an enemy hero or enemy unit champion, you can roll a die. On a 3+ enemy or hero unit champion suffers D3 mortal wounds. Not too bad, although I don't think you're going to have your spellcasters in combat a whole lot, or at least trying not to. Merciless Raider, number 2. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made by this general is a 6, the attack automatically wounds the target. Do not make wound rolls. Again, okay. Pretty combat-oriented. And then finally, the Teachings of Terscroll. If this general is on the battlefield at the start of the first battle round, before priority is determined, you can declare that the Tides of Death table will be reversed for your army. If you do so, the Ebb Tide ability applies in the first battle round, the High Tide ability applies in the second battle round, and the Flood Tide ability in the third round, Low Tide in the fourth round, and the fifth you start over. Where I think this is really good is if you think you can get into combat in turn 2, I think striking first is pretty powerful. This one could be a really, really valuable one for the Asharan heroes, which, as you'll see, the speed of these guys is so good that this isn't out of the realm of possibility. All right, and then we will take a look finally at the Eidolons, the trait of the Eidolons. So the Eidolons, the first one they've got is Ancient Pride. The unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a melee weapon that targets the general is a 1 or a 2, the attack fails, and the attack sequence ends. That's pretty powerful because it can allow some of these more melee-focused armies that can hit on 2+s a chance to miss, which is really good. The second one is Nightmare Legacy, Aspect of the Swarm only, which is different than Aspect of the Sea. So they split, remember, or you'll see here shortly. At the end of the charge phase, you can pick this general to carry out a monstrous rampage, even if it is not a monster, which is really, really slick. And then finally, Aspect of the Sea for Endless Sea Storm. If this general successfully casts a spell that is not unbound and unmodifying casting roll of 7+, the general can attempt to cast 1 extra spell in that phase. Again, not too bad. This army, I would say it's about average when it comes to Magic. So I don't know if this is going to be the first one you want to go for if you're trying to play competitively. But it is something to think about if you're trying to focus on spellcasters and don't mind playing with a little bit of flavor. Moving right along to the Artifacts of Power. What you'll see with the Artifacts of Power is there's 3 total types. Again, we'll split it between the Achelian heroes, the Isharan heroes, and then the Eidolon General. So that's kind of the route we're going to go with these. The first one is Disharmony Stones. Once per battle, at the start of your hero phase, pick up to 2 enemy heroes within 12 inches of the bearer, and your opponent must choose one of the following. So that is within 12, not wholly within. Roll a dice for each hero you picked. On a 3+, that hero suffers a mortal wound. The next one is 5+, the hero suffers a D3 mortal wounds, or finally, each hero you pick suffers D3 mortal wounds, then roll a die. On a 4+, the bearer suffers D3 mortal wounds. So what it's trying to do here is, would you like to not guarantee, but increase your odds of actually getting a mortal wound? You'll pick option A. Let me rephrase. If I'm the opponent, I could say, well, on a 3+, I'll only take 1 wound. On a 5+, if I want to be a little bit riskier, I'll take D3. But if I'm willing to eat 3 mortal wounds right out of the gate, or D3 mortal wounds, then I can have him potentially also eat D3 mortal wounds if he rolls a 4+. So there's a little bit of a gambling component there. The next one is the Potion of Hateful Frenzy. Once per battle at the start of your hero phase, you can say the bearer will drink this potion. If you do so until the end of that turn, add 1 to hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made by the bearer. Add 1 to the attack characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons. Add 1 to the run and charge rolls for the bearer. However, at the start of the next hero phase, you take D3 mortal wounds that cannot pile in until the end of the turn. So it's a little bit of pay me now, or don't pay me now, pay me later. You can get a little bit more aggressive. And then finally, Armor of Synthai. If the unmodified hit roll for the attack targets the bearer as a 6, all the effects that would be triggered by that roll are ignored. So this is just a little bit of defensive attack. that prevents like mortal wounds and additional damage, things of that nature. And that is a pretty good one overall. Moving into the Asharan heroes, so we'll change our camera view here just a little bit. We have got the Dritch Leech. Subtract 1 from casting rolls, unbinding rolls, and dispelling rolls for enemy wizards within 18 inches of the bearer. This doesn't affect the Idoneth units. So if you're relatively close to them, then they are a little bit less effective. Maybe slows down average armies a fair bit. I don't know about your Tzeentch armies or heavy spellcasters. I think that they'll probably overcome that in general, but a little bit of good defensive tech there. For the second one for the Asharan heroes is Rune of Surging Gloomtide. Once per battle at the end of your first movement phase, you can say the bearer will summon a Gloomtide shipwreck from the Ether Sea. If you do so, you can set up 1 Gloomtide shipwreck wholly within 12 inches of the bearer and more than 3 from all models, objectives, and other train features, endless spells, and invocations, and add it to your army. So it's kind of a cool way to get a second Gloomtide shipwreck, because you can normally deploy one, and this will allow you to add another one. Which you'll see later. There are some grand strategies and whatnot that take advantage of these. So something to look at. Once per battle for Brain Barnacles, the third one, the start of your hero phase, you can pick 1 enemy hero within 12 inches of the bearer and roll 2d6. If the roll in inches is equal to or greater than the distance between the bearer and that enemy hero, subtract 1 from hit rolls and wound rolls for the enemy hero for the rest of the battle. That is, again, a little bit of defensive tech for your wizards. And then finally, moving into the Eidolon artifacts, the last of the 3 categories. The first one we've got is the Bioshock shells. Once per battle at the start of the combat phase, you can say the bearer will use the Bioshock shells. If you do so, pick 1 enemy hero with a 9 on the bearer that is visible to them and roll 3d6. If the roll is greater than the enemy's hero's bravery characteristic, the strike last effect applies to that enemy hero till the end of that phase. Where this could be really cool is you go in, maybe you're at high tide, maybe you're not, maybe you're turn 2, where it's tide is floating in. You can pop this and cause them in effect to go last, even though you're not striking first, which is pretty handy. Kind of extends 2 attack first turns. The second one is Whirl Shell. Once per battle at the start of the combat phase, you can say the bearer will unleash the power of the Whirl Shell. If you do so until the end of that phase, if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a melee weapon targets the bearer as a 1 or a 2, that attack sequence fails. So again, defensive tech, just like the Asharan. Defensive tech, or I'm not the Asharan, I'm sorry, the Kellen heroes. They have that defensive tech as well. And then finally, the Kraken Tooth. This is a once per battle. You can pick 1 enemy unit within 12 of the bearer is visible to them. Roll a die. On a 1, the bearer suffers D3 mortal wounds, so that'll get you. On a 2 through 5, the Kraken is released. The target suffers D3 mortal wounds. And then on a 6, Tasty Morsel. Pick 1 model from the target unit. If that model has a wound characteristic less than 10, it is slain. If that model has a wound characteristic of 10 or more, it suffers 2d6 mortal wounds. So it's tough to get this one. It's a 1 out of 6, but I mean, imagine a Storm Drake guard disappearing off the board, totally full of wounds, 9 health rather, and then you roll. I'm sorry. Then you it's within 12, and you roll a d6. You get a 6. It's gone. It's dead. I mean that is pretty powerful. Pretty powerful. And what's kind of cool about it is it talks about an enemy unit. It doesn't talk about a character. So, I mean, you've got some options there. That's a really powerful one. Now, again, you're only hitting it on a 6, but, that might be worth rolling if you can't find something else you want to take. From here, moving to the mount traits. So, for the mount traits, this splits. And what you're going to see here is it splits between what they call the Beast Bond traits, between the Deep Mare and the Leviathan. And you can pick 1 Deep Mare and 1 Leviathan in your army to get one of the following. So for the Deep Mare, This is called Swift Fin and Peril, Impaler, number 1. If the roll for unit Deep Mare Horn ability is a 6, the target suffers D3 mortal wounds instead of D3 mortal wounds. So that's pretty slick. I think that's worth taking. Savage Ferocity. Add 1 to the attack characteristics of this unit's Fang and Talons and Lashing Tails. So that's a pretty good one for increasing the sheer number of attacks you can get. And then finally, Void Chill Darkness, Deep Mare only. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by enemy units within 3 inches. That's also pretty good. I think all 3 of these are fairly competitive. Your Deep Mares, I think, could be reasonably squishy, and so something that takes away tax could be a real benefit. Now, moving on to the Leviathan, which is your behemoth, you've got one called Ancient. And the Ren characteristics for weapons used against the target are -1. If the Ren characteristic for a weapon used for an attack targets this unit is a -1, is changed to a blank. So basically, -1s go to nothing. So that'd be good against things like Vindictors or a lot of the Caradron Overlord range weapons. They're kind of -1 to rend. So that would kind of effectively neutralize that a little bit. And its armor is pretty good, so wouldn't be terrible. The second one is Denizen of the Darkest Depths. Subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target this unit that have a damage characteristic of 1. So that would be good against perhaps Fire Slayers or any of the guns from the Caradron Overlords or some of your standard troop models. That could make them just that much harder to wound. So 2 pieces of attack that really make them more survivable. And the last one is Reverberating Carapace. Increase the range of this unit's Void Drum ability from 12 to 15 inches. And we'll get into that, but that 3 inches can really sneak up on you. So I think that could be reasonable, but if I'm going to play with this behemoth, I'm going to try and really take advantage of the defense, I think. Alrighty. Moving into the Lore of the Deep. So this is the only school that the Idoneth Deepkin wizards have available to them. 4 spells. Steed of Tides. This is a casting value 5, range is 6. You can pick 1 hero that's not a monster, and you basically remove him from the battlefield, and you can set him back up on the battlefield more than 9 inches from all enemy units. So again, more mobility for an army that's already pretty darn fast. This might be good for your non-mounted heroes. I don't know if this would be the first one I would take, though, just due to the speed of the rest of my army. The next one is Counter Current. It's got a casting value of 6 and a range of 18. If cast, pick 1 enemy unit within range and visible to the caster. Until your next hero phase, have the run and charge rolls for that unit. So that's pretty good. That'll slow something down and prevent you from getting charged. The next one I really like, called Pressure of the Deep. Has a casting value of 7, range of 12. Pick 1 enemy model within range. Visible to the caster, roll a die. If the result is greater than the model's wounds characteristic, it's slain. So it's not going to be any big hero characters, but it can definitely get an Annihilator or something else with 3 wounds that might be sitting on 2 up armor. So pretty good. Cavalry is another great example of something that could really get picked off by that. And then finally, Arcane Corrasion. Arcane Corrasion is a spell that has a casting value of 6 and a range of 12. Pick 1 enemy unit within range, invisible to caster, worsen the Ren characteristic by 1 until the next hero phase. So a way to kind of buff your otherwise average to lackluster armor skills. All right, moving on to the Enclaves. The first one we're going to get into is the Iron Wrench. This is called the Legacy of Glory. You can carry out heroic actions with a friendly hero of this faction instead of any other heroic actions with that hero. If you do so, pick 1 friendly Kellen unit wholly within 12 of the hero. Until the end of that turn, you can choose for that unit to be affected either by Flood Tide or Ebb Tide from the Tides of Death table. So either they can run and still shoot or charge, or they can fall back and still shoot or charge. So that's really going to improve your maneuverability. And then the next one, the Nautilus, is something called Crushing Assault. You can carry out the monstrous rampage with a friendly Nautilus Leviathan instead of any other monstrous rampages you carry out with it. If you do so, change the rend characteristic of the massive scythe fins and crushing jaw to -3 until the end of next combat. Depending on which armies you're up against, that could be of real benefit. But if you're up against, I don't know, something like Night Haunts or something with lower armor save, it could be a lot harder to really affect a whole lot of damage. The Morphan Soul Magic Adepts. If the Lure Light ability of a friendly Soul Render affects a Namarti unit, add 3 to the number slain models return. So we'll talk about the Soul Render, the Morphan Soul Render. It comes with the Start Collecting box, and basically that unit can bring back your basic battle line troops, typically in a D3 unless it hits with a particular weapon, and then it's an automatic 3. So this would get you an additional 3. So you can bring back 6 units. That could make the Soul Render, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, a better sneak peek. All right, moving on to number 4 of 6, the Futhan. Let's adjust this just a little bit here. Bloodthirsty Shiver. You can include Bloodthirsty Shivers in your army. At the start of your combat phase, you can pick 1 unit from each Bloodthirsty Shiver in your army. If you do so until the end of that phase, unmodified hit rolls for an attack made with the unit's ferocity bite is 6. It gets 2 hits on the target instead of 1. Make a wound and save roll for each hit. If the attacking unit is from 3 or more units of the same Bloodthirsty Shiver, its ferocious bite scores 3 hits on an unmodified hit roll instead of 6. All right, so what all is that saying? Well, it's basically saying that if you take the Futhayan Enclave, then you can treat your Kellen Guard as your Kellen Guard, if you as you can take them as Blood Shivers, which is 3 of them. And if you have an Kellen King as your general, then you can take them as battle line as well. And if they are taken as a Shiver, if they hit with a 6, it scores 2 hits instead of 1. And you still have to roll and save for both. But if it's within 3 inches of 1 or more units from the same Shiver, then it scores 3 hits. So it's really trying to take advantage of these mounted aquatic cavalry and getting some more production out of them. So if you're big into the mounted cavalry and you like running the Achillean Kings, that might be a cool way to go. That might be a good enclave to take. The next one is the Dom Hyan, and they've got the Namarti Savages. So, if you take the first turn in the current battle round, in your combat phase after friendly Dom Hyan Namarti units have fought for the first time in that phase, if there's no enemy units within 3 inches of that unit, you can attempt to charge that unit if it's in 12 inches of the enemy. If it finishes within half an inch of that enemy, you can pick that unit to fight a second time in that phase when it's your turn to do so. If you take a second turn in that current battle round, when a friendly hero issues the redeploy command to another unit, you can pick 3 units to receive the command instead of only 1. So this is basically allowing your troops to your basic Namarti troops to maybe get to attack a second time if they finish off a unit by charging another unit within 12 inches. And it also allows you to redeploy 3 units when you try and do the redeploy order. That has a lot of flexibility. That is also a very good enclave. Gives you a lot of tactical flexibility. And the Bryumdar, that's the last one here. So they have something called Supreme Soul Squires. During deployment, if you put a Soul Squire using the Finder of the Ways ability if you set up a friendly Soul Squire unit using the Finder of the Ways ability, up to 3 Deepkin units can join the Soul Squire instead of 2. In addition, when you set up any units that join the Soul Squire, you can set that unit wholly within 12 and no more than 9 away from all enemy units. So it gives you a little bit more tactical deployment, and we'll get into the Soul Squires here as we get a little deeper. So those are the Enclaves. Next, we transition, get past the Path to Glory, and we move to the match play. So let's take a quick peek at the grand strategies. For the grand strategies, we have 4. You've got the first one, which is a Kellen Pursuit. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy with 3 or more Kellen units wholly within enemy territory. This one seems like a really good one as long as you have the units, because you're so fast, it shouldn't be hard to get into your opponent's territory. The next one is Creeping Gloomtide. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy. If any Gloomtide shipwrecks in your army on the battlefield, and all of them are more than 3 inches away from the enemy units. Maybe a little tougher. Because if you've got a fast opponent or you're not winning the attrition battle, it might be hard to win that one. So I'm not sure I love that one. Dominion of the Deep Ones. When the battle ends, complete this grand strategy. If only monsters on the battlefield are friendly Leviathans. I could see that one maybe being a benefit if you are taking a Nautilus army. In that case, it would create Leviathans as battle line. But outside of that, I don't think I'd be using it. And then finally, the Navardi Assault. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy. If 2 more friendly units are within 3 of enemy units, or if only battle line units on the battlefield are friendly Navardi units. So I think that would be good if you were playing a battle line heavy force and looking to overwhelm your opponent with the sheer number of troops that you had, and you were doing some of that recursion with bringing back the Soul Render to try and bring back your basic troops. That could be pretty good. But I really like the Kellen Pursuit. I think that's the best of the 4. All right, and then the battle tactics. We've got 6 here to choose from. First one is the Assassins of High Tide. Complete this battle tactic if 2 or more enemy units are destroyed during the turn by your units. I think that's totally feasible, especially at high tide, because you attack first. If you get enough forces focused on your enemy, that could be doable. The next one is Predators of the Deep. Pick 1 unit in your opponent's starting army is on the battlefield, has wound characteristics of 8 or more, 0 wounds allocated to it. You complete this tactic if the unit is destroyed by friendly Alopex units. So that's kind of the bigger shark with 2 riders on him. I don't know how. I think that feels pretty specialized. I don't know that that's a great one. Revenge the Namarti. You complete this battle tactic if your enemy hero or monster is destroyed during this turn by an attack made by a friendly Namarti unit. That certainly could be one that you could pick off, maybe at high tide, something along those lines, or you strike first or making them strike last. That could be doable, especially because you have reasonable damage output. Deny Trespassers, number 4. Pick 1 shipwreck in your army that's within 12 inches of the enemy units. You complete it if you remove all of the enemy units from the shipwreck at the end of the turn. So basically clear everything out. That should also be pretty doable. I think that's a good one. Finally, Trapped in the Undercurrents. You complete this battle tactic of 3 or more Deepkin units, retreat, make a charge move. This is a perfect turn 4. Fall back because of ebb tide and then charge. That is just made to go with your turn 4. And then finally, the Asharan Defiance. So when you reveal it, pick 1 objective wholly within the enemy territory. At the end of the turn, you complete this battle tactic. If you control the objective and there's a friendly Asharan unit within 6 inches. I think that's also very doable because your units are so fast that you can get in there, quickly either eliminate the opposing units or overwhelm them with sheer volumes of numbers and get your wizard in there. So I think, although you'd have to be aggressive with your wizard, it's totally doable. All right, so now let's transition to the actual War Scrolls here. Zooming in just a little bit. All right, the first one is the Eidolon of Mathlan. This is the aspect of Storm. This one's really geared towards combat. So they've got a number of abilities. You can see that it moves 12, 12 wounds, 3 up save, 10 bravery. It can fly, and it has a 5+ ward. And then also has something called Crashing Upon the Foe. You can heal D3 wounds allocated to this unit after it makes a charge move. Add 1 to the attack and damage characteristic of the unit's spear. Repress Fury if it made a charge move. It can still retreat and charge in the same turn, so it doesn't have to be turn 4 to get away with that. It has something called Drench with Hate. Add 1 to the wound rolls to attacks made with melee weapons by friendly Deepkin units. Not the mounts, though. They're wholly within 12 of this unit. And then finally, it's got one called Pulled into the Depth. The hero phase, you can pick an enemy hero with wounds characteristic 8 or less, and it has to be within 3 inches. Add 1 to the hit and wound rolls to attack. So this one's very offensive-minded. You can see there's no ranged weapons on it. Generally, its spear's got 4 attacks. Cruel Hook's got 4. Sharp Fangs is 2d6. Pretty reliable hit, except for the Sharp Fangs. Wounds are 2 ups. Sharp Fangs is 4 up. Rend -2, -1, 2 damage, and then a 1. So pretty solid. The next one is the Eidolon aspect of the sea. This one's much more of a spellcaster. You can cast 2 spells in the hero phase and attempt to unbind 2 spells in the enemy hero phase. It can fly. It's got a 5+ ward. It can reroll casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls for this unit. If you cast any spells in your hero phase, you can heal up to D3 wounds allocated to this unit at the end of the phase. Next is the Tranquility of the Abyss. Units within 18 have a bravery characteristic of 10. That really boosts their average bravery. That's pretty darn good. Cloying Sea Mist. This is a casting value of 6 and a range of 12. Pick 1 unit or 1 enemy unit within range. If you picked a friendly unit, you can heal D3 wounds allocated to that unit. If you picked an enemy unit, you can cause D3 mortal wounds. So most of your normal units outside of your behemoth or your mounts will have multiple wounds, but your standard troopers will have just 1 wound. So some moderate use there. And then they've got something called the Tsunami of Terror, casting of 7, range of 12. Pick D3 enemy units within range. They subtract 1 from their save rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target the unit until the next phase. So softens up your units a little bit. It does have a range attack, D3. Hits and wounds on 3s. Rend is -2, damage is 2. And then it's got a handful of melee weapons, but it's very much like any sort of spellcaster, not super reliable, as you can see. Speed 12, wounds 12, 3 up save, and it's got that 5+ ward. Next, you have got your Akellan King here. And this is, this one's riding on what looks like a mount. So it can fly, moves 14, 8 wounds, 3 up save. And it has something called Sealth, the High King Shield. Each time this unit is affected by a spell or an ability of an endless spell, you can roll a die. On a 3+, you ignore that effect. Very powerful. And it's an option too. So if you have a endless spell that you want to cast on it, you can have that take effect. And then it's got something called First Among Akellans. Add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made with melee weapons for Akellan units wholly within 12, so buffs your units. It's got a Deep Mare Horn. If it makes a charge move, you can pick 1 enemy unit within 1 inch of the unit, roll a die on a 2+, takes D3 mortal wounds, and then Supreme Lord of the Tides. Final ability. Once per battle at the start of combat phase, pick 3 of your units that are affected by the High Tide ability. And wholly within 12, add 1 to the attack characteristic. So again, layering on additional attacks when you're striking first. So really a very powerful first strike army. And then the other Akellan King here is a little bit different. So this one moves 4, 1 less wound, 3+ save, bravery 10. It can still fly. And you add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by melee weapons for Akellan units wholly within 9. It's got a Deep Mare Horn, which is the 2+ D3 mortal wounds to an enemy unit you charge. It also has something called Wave Rider, which gives your bladed polearm a rend characteristic of -3 and a damage of 3. And then it has something called Lord of Tides, which is different than the Supreme Lord of Tides, because once per battle, at the end of your charge phase, pick up D3 units. You pick up to D3 units, wholly within 12. If you do so, at the end of the turn, units you picked are affected by the High Tide ability in the Tides of Death table. So this essentially gets you D3 units once per battle that can do this special ability outside of turn 4. Moving on, we're going to take a look at a few casters here, magic users, and then we'll move on to some priest types. So the Asharan Tidecaster and both Lotan are spellcasters. Both 5 wounds, both bravery 8, both move 6, and both are going to have 4-up saves. Looking at the Tidecaster specifically, they can cast 1 spell in the hero phase, and they can unbind 1 spell in the enemy hero phase. They have a 5+ ward, which is standard. And then they've got Masters of the Ether Sea. Basically, it lets you pick 2 different Isharan rituals to influence Ether Sea during the battle instead of 1, which we went over the rituals earlier. So that's a pretty useful ability overall. And then finally, it has a specific spell called Riptide, casting value of 7, range 18. You pick an enemy within range, invisible. That unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. In addition, and this is cool, subtract 1 from the hit rolls for attacks made by that unit until the end of your next hero phase. So does a little bit of damage, nice debuff. 7's not the easiest thing to cast, but pretty good. Lotan is... he also has a 5-up ward save, and then you can add 1 to the wound rolls for attacks made with melee weapons by friendly Deepkin units wholly within 12 here. And then it's got something called Fount of Willpower. Once per battle, if this unit is on the battlefield at the start of your hero phase, you can pick 1 ritual from the ritual table and 1 friendly Deepkin unit, wholly within 12 until the end of your next hero phase. The unit picks affected by the ritual, in addition to any other ritual. So slightly different takes. The Asharan Tidecaster will allow you to get 2 rituals. This one allows you to, Lotan will allow you to pick another ritual and 1 unit within 12 inches and to gain advantage of that, plus whatever ritual you started with. So pretty good overall. Probably important to note that it looks like the Tidecaster, Asharan Tidecaster, does a little bit more damage, but both are wizard attack profiles, so nothing amazing. Now, moving on to the Asharan Soulcrier. This also has a 5-up ward save, just like the other heroes, and then it has something called Finder of the Ways. During your deployment, instead of setting this unit on the battlefield, you can place it to the side and say it's traveling the Ether Sea as a reserve unit. If you do so, when you would set up a different Idoneth Deepkin unit during deployment, you can say that it is joining the unit traveling the Ether Seas as a reserve unit. Up to 2 units can join this way. Then in your movement phase, you can set up a unit wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield edge and more than 9 from all enemy units. If you do so, set up all the units that join this unit wholly within 9 of this unit and more than 9 from all enemies. So basically, you can use this guy to hold in reserves and allow 2 other units to be in reserves. And then when you bring them on, they come in with 6 inches of the board edge and with 9 of the Asharan Soulcrier and also the enemies. You got to stay outside of 9 for the enemies. Kind of a cool little ability. Again, I feel like the Deepkin are so fast that this might be good for keeping your opponent on their heels. But, in terms of getting around the board, I don't know that you gain a lot of advantage. Really, I think it's surprising keeping your opponent honest on their deployment. And then finally, the Asharan Soul Render. The Asharan Soul Render, one thing to note about them is this does come in the box set. And we'll talk a little bit about the value here. It has something called Allure Light. And basically, you can pick 1 friendly Nemartine unit within 18 inches and return up to D3 models slayed to that unit. You can return up to 3 models if any enemy models were slain by attacks made by this unit's Talon Hook. which is its primary attack, 4 attacks, 3 to hit, 3 to wound, 1 rend, 2 damage. So not unreasonable. So a way to kind of recycle units back into your army. In and of itself, it's okay. I think with some of the other benefits, rituals, whatnot that you can layer on, that's when it really gets powered. But I don't see resurrecting units as a big play for this army, but it's a neat little option. They also have something called the Hangman's Knot. Once per battle at the end of the combat phase, you can pick one enemy model. It's a wound characteristic of 7 or less and does not have the mound. And is within 3 inches of this unit. Roll 2d6. The roll is greater than the enemy's wound characteristic. It is slain. That could just remove a character from the board. Pretty incredible. I think that is a more useful ability in my opinion. But this character's not incredibly tough with only a 4-up save. It does have a 5+ ward, which is pretty good, but only 5 wounds. So it could be a pretty neat ability. All right, moving on. So let's go to the ill-fated here, Elthane ill-fated. Again, 5 wounds, 4 up, 5+ ward save. This is considered a soul render as well. And we're getting to the last 2 characters here. Damage again on the primary attack is 2 with a -2 rend, and 3s to hit and wound, 3 attacks. So this thing has what's called an Envenom Bite. If the unmodified hit roll for the attack is with this unit's Envenom Bite is a 6, it does a mortal wound on the target and the attack sequence ends. So 6s on the to hit roll does the mortal wound and it ends. And that is for not the primary attack, but the Envenom Bite, which is 4 dice, 4s and 4s, 1 damage, no rend. And then it has Lure Light, which is that same ability where you can bring back Namarti units that are wholly within 18 inches in its D3 models. You can, and if you kill something made with your Taloon Sickle and Soul Net, then instead of D3, it's 3. The Soul Net is the same ability where you can basically pick an enemy model with a wound characteristic of 7 or less. If it's within 3 of this unit, roll 2d6. The roll is greater than the enemy model's wound characteristic. It's slain. It's kind of like a giant's bag trick where you just put them in the bag and make them go away. So neat ability once again. And then we'll go down to Elathane's Soul Raid. 1 wound, 5 up, and I believe that there are 4 models in this unit, each with a different weapon, and they denote which model has which weapon. You can see there's kind of a variety of different to hit and damage and rend characteristics that are available. It's kind of 6-up ward save, kind of a neat themed character unit. It is Namarti, so theoretically it could be affected by having models brought back. So kind of cool little character unit. I don't know that's all that powerful, but cool nonetheless. All right, now we're going to get into some of the mounts essentially. And these are 4 ups for saves, 7 bravery, 4 wounds. I think of the unit is 3 models. Generally speaking, 14-inch speed. So this first one, the Shaolin Guard, they're more a defensive unit. No ranged weapons at all to speak of. And their offensive weapons are reasonable. Nothing to write home about. I guess the Fangs and Lashing Tail can do D3 wounds, which is better than the Hellsaber, but okay. Where it really shines is it ignores modifiers, both positive and negative, to save rolls for this unit. So it's always going to be a 4-up, no matter what. If it charges, in the turn that it charges, its save characteristic goes to a 3-up instead of a 4-up. So pretty resilient, especially with 4 wounds. Not a bad model at all. The Morsar Guard, I think, are a little bit more offensive in nature. They also do not have ranged attacks. Both of these units can fly. They are considered mounts. They have champions. You can have a standard bearer, and then, of course, a musician that adds 1 to the charge roll. This has two abilities, one called Wave Rider, which essentially gives the spears themselves a rank characteristic of -2 and 2 damage if they made a charged move in the same turn, which beefs up this weapon, the Volt Spear, pretty well. And then it has something called Biovoltaic Blast, Biovoltaic Blast. Once per battle, after this unit makes a charge move, you can say this unit unleashes its Biovoltaic energy. If you do so, pick one enemy unit within 1 inch of the unit, roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in the unit. For each 4 up, suffers a mortal wound. If it's a 6 up, then it's D3 mortal wounds. Add 1 to the roll if the number of models the enemy unit is greater than the number of models in this unit. So really, it's going to be a 3 up. That 3 up and 5 up instead of 4 up and 6 up. So pretty good little impact hits. Likely you're going to be charging units that are bigger than you, given that there's only 3 models here. But neat unit. Again, very fast, not as resilient as its brother unit, the Shaolin Guard. So, but not too bad. All right, the last mount that we're going to look at, and this art is incredible, is the Alopexes. And these are also fast, 4 up saves, 8 wounds, 6 bravery, unit of 1. And although you can take these depending on which faction you choose in bigger units. And they fly, and you can have a champion there. And then they've got ranged attacks, both 24 and 18 inches. 3 ups to hit and wound, 1 Ren for the harpoon launcher, D3 damage, and the net launcher is only 1 attack and does a flat 3, which is pretty good. They are bloodthirsty predators, and 1 of the attack characteristic for this unit's ferocious bite, so it goes from 3 to a 4. If it is within 6 inches of any models that have any wounds or mortal wounds allocated to them, so it's like blood in the water and they attack more. And then the net launcher itself has something called Entangled. If the attack made with the unit's net launcher scores a hit, the target cannot make a Paladin move that turn. So a way to kind of control the battlefield, not too bad, especially if you're trying to keep units from getting engaged in the combat. And then here is the multiple Alopex unit rule. It's called Merciless Shiver. This unit has 2 more models. It is coherent if each model is within 3 inches horizontally. So it just kind of gives room for these bigger models to spread out. Pretty slick. All right, the last creature, and happens to be the only behemoth in this army, is the Leviathan. It does have a 24-inch range attack, which is a bit of a premium here in this army, not a lot of range attacks. 8 3-ups for both to hit and wound, 1 Ren D3 damage, so pretty good, actually. It has a number of weapons. It's got spears and razor shell harpoons, some massive scything fins and crushing jaws. The jaws themselves do a flat 3 damage. The fins are tiered depending on the number of wounds. When he's the healthiest, it is 4 wounds all the way down to 1. To note, this thing starts off with a 2-up save, so pretty good. 1 up if you're all out defense with it. And move at 10, 16 wounds, so it's pretty tanky. It does fly. It is considered a mount. It has a crushing charge. 2-up does, on a 2-up to any unit that's within 1 inch, let's see here. Actually, it is, if you carry out the Stomp Monstrous Rampage with this unit and the enemy unit you pick has a wound characteristic of 1, the enemy suffers D6 mortal wounds on a 2-up instead of a D3. So not on the charge, but rather the monstrous ability. It just does more damage, which is good if it's a wound characteristic of 1. The Jaws of Death. So if you use your Crushing Jaws and it's a 6, the attack inflicts D3 mortal wounds on the target, and the attack sequence ends, so just auto 3. If the unmodified hit roll for the attack made with Crushing Jaws is 6 and the target's a monster, it is D6 mortal wounds, so really good opportunity to do some extra damage on monsters. And then finally, they've got something called the Void Drum, which is add 1 of the save rolls for attacks that target friendly Deepkin units that have wound characteristics of 8 or less within 12 inches of any friendly Leviathans. And in addition, add 1 to the hit rolls made by attack for friendly Namarti units that target any enemy units wholly within 12. So a little bit of a buff. Its damage output's okay. Where it really shines is its buffs and its armor. And it does bring some very limited range attacks, or it brings range attacks to an otherwise very limited number of range attacks for the army. All right, and we are close to being done. We're going to get to the basic troops here. These are the Thrall Masters, the Kellen Thrall Masters, and they are 4 up save, 5 wounds, and this is a character, and he's got a number of attacks. He's got 5 attacks with his esoteric weapons, which does 2 damage, 1 ren, 3s to hit and wound, so pretty reliable, 5 total attacks. What's cool about him is you can, at the start of the combat phase, you can pick one of the following fighting stances. So you can go with Way of the Depth. You can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by friendly Namarti units wholly within 12. So those are your standard core troops, can reroll hits of 1, or Way of the Riptide. And what that does is those units within 12, if an unmodified 6 is rolled, it scores 2 hits instead of 1. So it's a way to kind of double the attack outputs. So some pretty good efficiencies there. Or finally, you can go with the Way of the Vortex, which is subtract 1 for wound rolls for attacks that target this unit and friendly Namarti units. So within 12, wholly within 12. So a way to add some resiliency. You will note that he's only got a 4 up save, so he's not the most reliable. And then we've got the Thralls, which I believe the Thralls come in the Start Collecting box. Not too bad. They are 6 move, 7 bravery, 5 up armor, so not great, 1 wound. You can, of course, have a champion. And then it has something called a Sweeping Bolo. Add 1 of the attack characteristics of this unit's Lanmari blades. If it attacks a target with a wound characteristic 1. Add 1 to the damage characteristic if it's targeting something with 3 or more. So if you're attacking, say, like Annihilators, then it does more damage. Or if it's lightly, or if it has just a 1 wound, then you can do more attacks. So not too bad. No ranged weapons. And then you've got the Reavers. And the Reavers have bows, 18-inch range, 3s and 3s, 1 ren, 1 damage, 2 attacks apiece. Can have a champion. And then this thing has something called Ripples in the Ether Sea. Add 1 of the hit rolls for attacks made with missile weapons by this unit if it targets within 9. So if you're close, which you probably can because you move quickly, you can add 1 to the attacks. And then finally, the last unit is the Gloomtide Shipwreck. It's your faction terrain. Basically, you've got 2 options. You can set this up as 2 scenery pieces. You can set the 2 scenery pieces touching, or you can set them up more than 3 inches from each other. If you set them touching, it's 1 large Gloomtide Shipwreck. If you're separated, then they're considered 2. And then this thing is defensible. So if it's small, you can put 5 Idoneth in there, and they have to be wound characteristics of 5 or less. And if this terrain feature was set up as a large shipwreck, you can put 10 Idoneth Deepkin in there, garrison. Again, the 5 wounds matter. And then it has something called Guardians of the Deep. Idoneth Deepkin units that do not have a mount have a ward save of 5 up while within wholly 6 inches of this terrain feature. So it's a bubble of 5+ ward saves, which is pretty good. The problem is your army moves super fast, so I don't know how often you're going to be around it. If a unit does not have the Idoneth keyword and within 3 inches of this terrain feature, it doesn't have any effect. So neat piece of terrain. It might be kind of limited functionality, but if you get a couple of them out on the board, which you can, you have a chance to kind of create these bunkers of ward saves. So pretty cool. And I think that covers just about everything in the book. At this stage, let's talk about my final thoughts. Okay, so now we've gone through the book, done a pretty good deep dive on all the rules and all the units, and we took a look at the art and some of the backstory, perhaps a little bit superficially, but I want to state that you should really go through and take a look at it. Games Workshop puts a ton of time and effort into exploring that, and I think it's a good read. But But what are the thoughts? What do I really think? And I want to talk about playstyle, competitive, and start collecting box. Those are the three areas I'm going to hit. So looking at the playstyle, I think that they are fast and mobile. Their armor isn't great. It's about a 4 up for most things, sometimes a 5 up. The behemoth can get down to a 1 up by using all out defense. And that's pretty good, but that's not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. So you can't bank on a ton of wounds nor a lot of armor saves unless you do a very, very specific build using Behemoth's battle line. I think that they're moderately hard hitting too to go along with it. So it strikes me a little bit as a glass cannon army. Perhaps not as much as some of the armies out there, but certainly I think that they could put their fair share of heat out. But ultimately speed, mobility, and battlefield control I think is certainly part of it. I think that it's reasonably beginner friendly. I think the high tide mechanics where you look at all 4 tides as they come in on battle rounds 1, 2, 3, and 4, add a little bit of fun, a little bit of complexity, maybe not the most straightforward mechanic out of the gate, but I don't think it's unapproachable. But I think if you're going to get the most out of this army, you definitely need to know how to leverage that. That's certainly going to be a bit of a learning curve to a new player. It's not just going to be a straight in punch somebody in the face like maybe Giants, the Sons of Bahamut, or Ogre Kingdoms, or maybe some of the Stormcast builds, things of that nature. Now, is it competitive? I think it is competitive. The meta, the book is recently released. So I don't think there's a lot of tournament data out there in terms of how competitive and what it looks like. But I think anytime you've got speed and mobility, you can control objectives, and objectives win games, not killing models. Objectives win games. I think that you have to watch the fact that it's got limited range combat. So it does have some, but it's not as high as some of the armies recently. But the good news is I think this army is very good at controlling range combat of your enemies and can really slow that down. And that in the current meta could be very, very powerful. I'm going to throw it out there. I think these models are some of the most dynamic and creative models that Games Workshop has come out with for Age of Sigmar. And I think a true hobbyist that wants to explore this range and get very creative with the paint styles and the bases and some of the aquatic themes could do some amazing work there and really compete in kind of a painting competition factor. Last 2 things that I want to mention that I think are important. The strike first ability for turn 3 and the manipulation they can get through the rituals and other things, super powerful. That can level the playing field in a heartbeat. Whether it's chipping away wounds on behemoths or counter punching maybe another very heavy damage unit, you can really whittle down those characters and control the tempo of the battle. So in the hands of a player that's comfortable with this army, I think that's going to be really hard to get around. And then I think it's got some resilience with the 5 up ward saves on pretty much everything. Some of it's baked into the actual war scroll, especially with the characters, but for the core units, if you get them around the shipwrecks or take advantage of some of the spell casting or rituals or whatever the case may be, I think that's pretty good. And then you couple that with maybe bringing some units back a little bit. I think it doesn't make it a tanky army, but it does bolster it a little bit, where before I think it might have gotten run over. Now, the start collecting, is it worth it? I think for the thralls, absolutely. They're flexible, whether it's getting additional attacks against units with only 1 wound on average, or if it's against units with 3 or more wounds, having 1 to the damage characteristic, I think that's good. I think the guard, you can do either build with those mounts, whether it's the tanky version or the one that increases the charge damage and rend. I think those are pretty good, and they're very fast with a 14-inch move, 4 wounds, and on average a 4 save. I think you'll see them, if nothing else, as objective grabbers and taking care of some maybe the flanking units, whether it's like Hounds of Corn or things of that nature. I think it'll be pretty good. The Soul Render model, it's a neat character model, and I think it's kind of flavorful. Is it hyper competitive out of the gate? I don't know that it is. I think you've got to build around bringing models back. I think there's probably better points investments for the character slots for you, but it's not terrible and it is fun. I mean, let's not forget this game is also about having some fun and putting some enjoyable models on the table. So would I feel like, oh, this isn't a box worth getting? No, I think it is worth getting, and I think you could even get 2 of them right out of the gate. And other than the fact that you've got an additional soul render, you'll put all those models to use. So I think it is a very good way to start this army if you're looking to do it. So overall, I think the Idoneth Deepkin are a fast, mobile army that can strike first, manage range attacks, and does a moderate amount of damage and punches people in the face. If you like playing castle armies that are super tanky, lots of wounds, hard to remove, probably not going to be the army for you. The book itself is gorgeous. The models are gorgeous. I think it's going to be competitive. I think the start collecting boxes are certainly worth it. So I think GW did a nice job. There's not a lot of changes. I think from this book from the last. I think it's about the same, but certainly worth the investment. I think it was a good $50 spend or so thereabouts. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe, and we'll try and do more of these army book reviews. Thanks for turning in, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.